4. Scary True Childhood Home Alone Stories Story. 1. The Basement Voice. I was 11 years old when this happened, and even though I'm 23 now, I can still remember every detail like it was frozen in time. My parents had taken my younger sister to her dance recital 2 towns over, and they'd be gone until late that evening. They asked if I wanted to come along, but I refused because I thought sitting through hours of performances sounded miserable. My dad wasn't thrilled about leaving me by myself, but my mom convinced him I was mature enough. She made me promise to keep all the doors locked and not to answer for anyone I didn't recognize. I agreed without really thinking about it because I was just excited to have the whole place to myself for once. After they left, I made myself a massive sandwich and grabbed a bag of chips from the pantry. I settled into the living room couch and turned on my Xbox, ready to spend the entire evening playing my favorite game. Everything felt normal for the first couple of hours. I was deep into a campaign mode, headphones on, completely absorbed in the game. The sun was starting to set outside, casting long shadows through the living room windows, but I barely noticed. At some point, I paused to grab a drink from the kitchen. I walked through the dining room and into the kitchen, opening the fridge and pulling out a soda. That's when I noticed how quiet the house actually was. Without the game audio blasting in my ears, I could hear everything. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the occasional groan of the house settling. And something else. A faint sound I couldn't quite identify. I stood there in the middle of the kitchen, holding my soda, listening. The sound came again. It was like a soft thump, muffled and distant. I told myself it was probably just the water heater or the furnace kicking on. Our house made weird noises all the time, but something about that silence made me uneasy, though I couldn't explain why. I went back to the living room and continued playing, but I kept the volume lower this time. I found myself glancing toward the hallway every few minutes, checking to make sure nothing was there. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting my imagination get the better of me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then I heard it again. This time it was clearer. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was definitely coming from somewhere in the house. I muted the television and sat completely still, straining to hear. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock. Then I heard it again, and this time there was no mistaking it. It sounded like someone calling out, and it was coming from the basement. My stomach dropped. Our basement was unfinished, just concrete floors and exposed pipes and boxes of old junk my parents hadn't gotten around to throwing away. We rarely went down there except to do laundry or grab something from storage. And I knew for a fact that no one was supposed to be down there. My first thought was that I'd left the basement door open. Maybe the wind was creating some kind of echo through the vents or something. But when I walked over to check, the door was closed and locked from the inside, just like it always was. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, hand on the doorknob, listening. The sound came again, and this time it was unmistakable. It was a voice, low and muffled, like someone was trying to talk through the floorboards. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to make out what the voice was saying. I couldn't understand the words, but it sounded almost like someone was having a conversation. A one-sided conversation, like they were on the phone or talking to themselves. The voice would speak for a few seconds, then go silent, then start again. I backed away from the door slowly, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to open it and check, to prove to myself that I was just being paranoid and there was some logical explanation. Maybe it was the radio we kept down there, turning on by itself. Maybe it was sound traveling from a neighbor's house through the walls. But another part of me, the part that was making my hands shake and my breath come faster, knew that something was very wrong. I decided not to open the door. Instead, I grabbed the cordless phone from the kitchen and went upstairs to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I sat on my bed with the phone in my lap, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call my parents immediately. But another part of me was terrified they'd think I was overreacting or making things up. I didn't want to ruin their evening if it turned out to be nothing. I sat there listening for any other sounds. The house was silent again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I kept thinking about that voice in the basement. Who was down there? How did they get in? What did they want? About 30 minutes passed, and I started to relax a little. I convinced myself that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, or that it was just the pipes making noise. Old houses did that sometimes, right? They made all kinds of weird sounds that could be mistaken for voices if you were already on edge. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps climbing the basement stairs. Not sueno 548. The creaking of the house settling. Not the sound of pipes expanding and contracting. Actual footsteps, one after another, slow and steady, coming up from the basement. I froze, every muscle in my body locked in place. I could hear each individual step, the weight of someone climbing those old wooden stairs. I counted them in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4. Our basement had 14 steps. I'd counted them 100 times doing laundry. 5, 6, 7. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and stopped. There was a long pause, and then I heard the basement door creak open. The same door I'd checked earlier. The same door that had been locked. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I dialed my mom's cell phone with shaking hands. It rang 3 times before she answered. I could hear music and voices in the background. She sounded happy, relaxed. She asked what was wrong, probably picking up on something in my voice. I whispered that someone was in the house. She asked me to repeat myself. I said it again, a little louder. Someone is in the house. There was someone in the basement, and now they're upstairs. The background noise on her end disappeared immediately. She didn't ask questions. She didn't tell me I was being silly. She just told me to stay in my room with the door locked, and that they were calling the police right away. I could hear my dad shouting in the background, demanding to know what was happening. My mom told him to drive, just drive, they'd explain on the way. She stayed on the phone with me. She told me to stay quiet and stay hidden. She asked if I could still hear the person. I listened. I could hear someone moving around downstairs. Drawers were being opened and closed. Cabinets were being rifled through. The sounds were methodical, unhurried, like whoever it was had all the time in the world. At one point, I heard the person walk past the bottom of the staircase, leading to the second floor. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't come up. They didn't. Instead, I heard them walk back toward the kitchen. There was the sound of the refrigerator opening, the clink of glass. They were getting something to drink. That detail terrified me more than anything else. Whoever was in my house wasn't panicking. They weren't rushing. They were comfortable. They were acting like they belonged there. My mom kept talking to me in a low, calm voice. She told me the police were on their way. She told me I was doing great, that I was being so brave. She told me to stay exactly where I was and not to make a sound. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. I could hear the person continuing to move through the house. At one point, they went into the living room. I heard the television turn off. I'd left it on when I ran upstairs. Then I heard them in my dad's office. Papers rustling, drawers opening. Finally, I heard sirens outside. Distant at first and getting louder. The sounds downstairs stopped immediately. I heard quick footsteps, then the sound of the back door opening. My mom was still on the phone. She told me the police were there, that it was almost over. A few moments later, I heard voices downstairs. Official voices calling out that this was the police. I heard them moving through the house, clearing each room. Then there was a knock on my bedroom door. A voice identified himself as Officer Martinez. He told me it was safe to come out. I opened the door slowly. There were two officers standing in the hallway. One of them was young, maybe mid-20s. The other was older, with gray hair and kind eyes. The older one knelt down to my level and asked if I was okay. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if that was true. They took me downstairs and outside to a patrol car. The younger officer explained that someone had broken in through the basement window. It was one of those small windows near the ceiling, the kind that opened outward on a hinge. My dad usually left it cracked open for ventilation because the basement got musty. Whoever broke in had pried it open wider and squeezed through. They'd been hiding down there for who knows how long before coming upstairs. Maybe they were waiting for it to get dark. Maybe they were waiting to make sure I was alone. When the police arrived, the intruder had run out the back door and escaped through the yard into the woods behind our house. They'd sent officers to search, but the person had gotten away. My parents got home about 10 minutes later. I saw their car come screeching around the corner, going way too fast for our residential street. My mom was out of the car before it had even fully stopped. She ran to me and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. My dad was right behind her, his face pale and his hands shaking. After talking to the police, my dad went inside to see what had been taken. A lot of drawers and cabinets were open. Things were moved around. But as far as we could tell, nothing was actually stolen. That made it even creepier somehow. If they weren't there to rob us, what did they want? The police took a report and dusted for fingerprints. They found some on the basement window and on the refrigerator handle, but they never matched them to anyone in the system. They told us to install better locks and consider a security system. That night, none of us slept. My parents brought me into their room, and I slept on the floor next to their bed. My dad sat up in a chair by the window with a baseball bat across his lap. Every sound made us jump. Every creak of the house settling made my heart race. I kept thinking about that voice in the basement, about how long that person might have been down there before I even noticed. Had they been there when my parents left? Had they watched my family through the windows, waiting for the right moment? The worst part is knowing that if I hadn't muted the television at that exact moment, I might not have heard anything at all. I might not have known they were there until it was too late. My dad installed new locks on all the windows the next day. He put bars on the basement windows and got motion sensor lights for the backyard. We got a security system installed within a week. But none of that made me feel safe again. For months after that, I couldn't sleep in my own room. I'd hear sounds in the night and imagine someone climbing up from the basement again. I made my dad check the basement every single night before bed, even though I knew it was locked and alarmed. Even now, more than a decade later, I still think about that night. I've moved out. I have my own place. But I'm obsessive about checking locks. I have security cameras. I have multiple deadbolts. And I never, ever leave windows cracked open for ventilation. Because I know how quickly everything can change. How fast a normal evening at home can turn into a nightmare. And I know that somewhere out there, the person who broke into my house that night is still walking around. They were never caught. They were never identified. And sometimes I wonder if they remember that night the way I do. Story 2. The Babysitter Who Never Showed. When I was 9, my parents hired a new babysitter named Rebecca through some online service that was popular back then. She was a college student from the next town over, studying to be a teacher, and my mom thought she seemed perfect. Rebecca had great reviews from other families. She'd passed a background check, and she'd even brought references from her professors. Rebecca had babysat for me twice before, and both times had gone fine. She was friendly, brought over board games to play, and let me stay up a little past bedtime to finish a movie. She'd helped me with my homework and made really good grilled cheese sandwiches. My parents trusted her enough to leave me with her while they went to a wedding reception that was supposed to last until midnight. The night this happened started out completely normal. My parents were getting dressed up in their bedroom while I watched cartoons in the living room. My dad came downstairs in his suit, fumbling with his tie, and my mom followed in a dark blue dress I'd never seen before. She looked really pretty, and I told her so. They left around 6 in the evening. My mom kissed me goodbye and reminded me to be good for Rebecca. She told me there was money on the counter if we wanted to order pizza, and that I should call her cell if anything came up. My dad gave me a hug and told me not to stay up too late. I waved them off from the front door and went back to the couch, settling in to wait for Rebecca. Rebecca was supposed to arrive by 6:30. My mom had confirmed with her that morning, and Rebecca had texted back saying she'd be there right on time. I watched my shows and kept glancing at the clock on the wall. 6:30 came and went. By 7, I started to wonder if she'd forgotten or gotten the time wrong. I checked my mom's cell phone, which she'd left on the kitchen counter for me to use in emergencies. There were no new messages. I thought about calling my parents, but I didn't want to interrupt the wedding. They'd been looking forward to this for weeks. By 7:30, I was getting genuinely worried. I tried calling Rebecca's number from my mom's phone. It rang and then went to voicemail. I left an awkward message asking where she was and hung up. I tried calling my mom, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried my dad's phone too, with the same result. I figured they'd turn them off for the ceremony and would check their messages later. I left a message for my mom explaining that Rebecca hadn't shown up yet and asking her to call me back. I went back to watching television, trying not to worry. Maybe Rebecca had gotten stuck in traffic. Maybe her car had broken down and she couldn't call because her phone was dead. There were plenty of logical explanations. Around 8 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. I jumped up, relieved that Rebecca had finally arrived. I ran to the front door and looked through the peephole like my parents had taught me. but I didn't see anyone. The porch was empty. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack, keeping the chain latch secured. I stuck my head out and looked around. There was no one there. No car in the driveway. No one walking away down the street. Just empty porch and the sound of crickets. I closed the door and locked it again, feeling uneasy. Maybe it had been neighborhood kids playing ding-dong ditch. That happened sometimes. But something about it felt off. I went back to the living room and tried to focus on the television. A few minutes later, the phone rang. I picked it up expecting to hear Rebecca apologizing for being late. Instead, there was silence on the other end. Not even breathing. Just silence. I said hello a few times, my voice getting smaller with each repetition. No one responded. After about 10 seconds, the line went dead. I hung up and stared at the phone, my heart starting to beat faster. I tried calling my parents again. Still no answer. I tried Rebecca's number again, straight to voicemail. I was starting to panic, but I told myself everything was fine. Just some crossed wires. Maybe a wrong number. I decided to make myself some popcorn to calm my nerves. I went into the kitchen and pulled out the popcorn maker. I was waiting for it to finish when I heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps on the patio in our backyard. I turned off the kitchen light and moved to the window, peeking through the blinds. The backyard was dark except for the porch light we kept on at night. I couldn't see anyone, but I could have sworn I heard movement out there. My hands were shaking as I backed away from the window. I went to check the back door. It was locked. I knew it was locked because my dad always checked it before he left. But I checked it anyway, tugging on the handle to make sure. The phone rang again. I ran to answer it, hoping it was my parents. Instead, there was that same silence. I was about to hang up when I heard breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing. Someone was on the other end, listening to me. I hung up immediately and unplugged the phone from the wall. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. I ran around the house, checking every door and window. Everything was locked. I grabbed my mom's cell phone and tried calling her again. This time she answered. I could hear music and voices in the background. She sounded happy, asking what was wrong. I told her everything in a rush. Rebecca never showed up. Someone knocked on the door, but no one was there. Someone kept calling and breathing into the phone. I heard footsteps in the backyard. My mom's voice changed instantly. The happiness drained out of it and was replaced with something urgent and frightened. She told me to hang up and call 911 right away. She said they were leaving immediately and would be home as fast as they could. I could hear my dad in the background asking what was happening, his voice rising in panic. I hung up and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. I told her my name and address and explained that I was home alone and someone was outside my house. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were being sent to my location right away. She asked me where I was in the house. I told her I was in the living room. She told me to go to a room with a door that locked, preferably upstairs, and to stay there until the police arrived. I ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom, locked the door, and hid in their closet with the phone pressed to my ear. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking me questions to keep me calm. She asked about my favorite subject in school. She asked what I liked to do for fun. She asked if I had any pets. I answered in whispers, trying to focus on her voice instead of the creaking sounds the house was making. Then I heard it, a noise downstairs that made my blood run cold. It sounded like someone trying to open a window, the rattling of a frame being pushed upward. I whispered to the dispatcher that I thought someone was trying to get in. She told me to stay quiet and stay hidden. She said the police were less than 2 minutes away. I could hear the urgency in her voice, even though she was trying to sound calm. The rattling stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then I heard footsteps. Someone was inside the house. Heavy footsteps moving through the first floor. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. The footsteps moved from the kitchen into the living room. I could hear furniture being moved, drawers being opened. The person was searching for something, moving methodically through the house. Then the footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I held my breath. The dispatcher was still on the line, whispering that help was almost there. Just hold on. Just stay quiet. I heard the first stair creak. Someone was coming up. One step, then another. Slow and deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. I shrank back deeper into the closet, wedging myself between my mom's hanging dresses and my dad's suits. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I could hear them moving down the hallway. They stopped at my bedroom door. I heard the door open. They were in my room. Then I heard sirens. Beautiful, wonderful sirens getting louder and louder. The footsteps in my room stopped. Then they started moving fast, running back down the hallway, thundering down the stairs. I heard a crash from downstairs, like something being knocked over. Then I heard voices shouting, police voices commanding someone to stop. More crashes, the sound of the back door slamming open. The dispatcher told me the officers were in the house and it was safe to come out. But I stayed in the closet until I heard a knock on the bedroom door and a voice identifying herself as Officer Chen. I opened the closet door slowly and saw a female officer standing in the doorway. She had kind eyes and she smiled at me, even though I could see the tension in her jaw. She asked if I was okay, and I nodded, even though I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. She took me downstairs and outside to a patrol car. There were 3 police cars in front of my house, their lights flashing red and blue across the neighborhood. Neighbors were standing on their porches, watching. Officer Chen wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat with me in the back of her car. She explained that someone had broken in through the kitchen window. They'd pried it open from the outside. When the police arrived, the intruder had run out the back door and escaped through the yards. They'd sent officers to search, but the person had gotten away. My parents arrived about 10 minutes later. I heard their car before I saw it, the engine roaring as my dad took the corner too fast. The car screeched to a stop, and my mom practically fell out of the passenger seat, her high heels forgotten as she ran to me in her bare feet. She pulled me into her arms, and we both started crying. My dad was right behind her, his face white and his hands shaking. He kept asking the officers what happened, who did this, did they catch them? The police searched the house and found that my room had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, my closet was open, my bed was unmade. It looked like someone had been searching for something, though we never figured out what. The strangest part came later. The police tried to contact Rebecca to ask why she hadn't shown up. When they finally reached her the next day, she was confused. She said she'd sent a text message to my mom that afternoon, canceling because of a family emergency. She'd gotten a reply confirming that it was fine and they'd find someone else. But when my mom checked her phone, there was no such text. No cancellation, no reply. The police investigated further and discovered that someone had been using a spoofed phone number that looked like Rebecca's to send the fake cancellation. They'd also been using a number that looked like my mom's to reply to Rebecca. Someone had deliberately engineered the situation to make sure I would be home alone. They'd wanted Rebecca to cancel. They'd wanted my parents to think everything was fine. They'd planned the whole thing. The real Rebecca had no idea any of this was happening. She was horrified when she found out. She came to our house the next day to apologize, even though none of it was her fault. She'd been at the hospital with her grandfather all night, exactly where she said she'd be. The police never found out who broke into my house that night. The fingerprints they found didn't match anyone in the system. The phone spoofing was done through some kind of app that made it impossible to trace. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They'd planned it carefully, and they'd gotten away. That's what scared me the most. Not just that someone had broken in, but that they'd planned it. They'd watched us. They'd known about Rebecca. They'd known about the wedding. They'd known exactly when I would be alone. My parents installed a security system the following week. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. I didn't stay home alone again until I was in high school, and even then I hated it. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow made me think someone was there. I'm 25 now, and I still think about that night sometimes. I wonder who it was. I wonder why they targeted our house. And I wonder if they ever tried again with another family. The police said there had been similar incidents in neighboring towns, break-ins where babysitters mysteriously canceled at the last minute. But they never connected them to a specific person. Whoever broke into my house that night is still out there. And that thought keeps me up at night more than anything else. Story 3. The Locked Room. I was 10 years old, and my parents had gone to my older sister's college orientation, which was about 3 hours away. They'd be gone for the whole day, leaving early in the morning and not getting back until late that night. My sister was 17 and excited about starting college in the fall, and my parents wanted to tour the campus and meet with advisors. They asked if I wanted to come, but I'd already been on 2 college tours with them for my sister, and I was bored out of my mind both times. I begged to stay home. I promised I'd be responsible. I'd keep the doors locked. I wouldn't answer for strangers, all the usual rules. My mom was hesitant, but my dad pointed out that I'd be fine for one day. Our neighborhood was safe. The neighbors on both sides were home. They had my dad's cell number if anything went wrong. Finally, my mom agreed, though she made me promise to call and check in every few hours. They left around 7 in the morning. I was still in my pajamas, eating cereal and watching cartoons. My mom kissed me goodbye and reminded me about the leftover pizza in the fridge for lunch. My dad told me to stay out of trouble and gave me a high five. My sister didn't say anything, too busy checking her phone and looking nervous about the day ahead. I watched them drive away and felt that rush of freedom you get when you have the whole house to yourself. I spent the morning doing exactly what I wanted. I played video games without anyone telling me to take a break. I ate ice cream for a second breakfast. I jumped on my bed and blasted music in my room. Around noon, I heated up some pizza and took it upstairs to my room to eat while I played more games. I was in the middle of a level when I heard a noise from down the hall. It sounded like a door closing. I paused my game and listened. The house was quiet. I figured I'd imagined it, or maybe the wind had blown. Something shut. I went back to my game. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was definitely a door. I could hear the click of the latch. I got up and walked into the hallway to investigate. All the doors were in their usual positions. My parents' bedroom door was open like they always left it. The bathroom door was open. My sister's door was closed, which was normal because she always kept it shut, even when she wasn't home. I stood in the hallway for a minute, listening. Nothing. I shrugged and went back to my room. But as I turned around, I noticed something that made me stop. My sister's door had a piece of tape across the frame. My sister was paranoid about me going into her room when she wasn't home. She'd started putting a small piece of clear tape across the door and the frame as a way to tell if anyone had opened it. She thought she was so clever, but I'd known about it for months. The tape was broken. It was hanging loose, clearly torn when the door had been opened. I stared at it, my heart starting to beat faster. I hadn't been in my sister's room. I had no reason to go in there. So how was the tape broken? I reached out and tried the doorknob. It was locked. My sister always locked her door, even from the outside, using one of those keyed locks she'd convinced my dad to install. She was the only one with a key. I stood there staring at that broken piece of tape, trying to make sense of it. Maybe my sister had gone in her room before they left and forgot to replace the tape, but that didn't explain the sound I'd heard just minutes ago. I pressed my ear against the door and listened. I couldn't hear anything at first. Then I heard a very faint creaking sound, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. Someone was in my sister's room. I backed away from the door slowly, my mind racing. I ran downstairs and grabbed the cordless phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I called my dad's cell phone. It rang 4 times before he answered. I could hear talking in the background, like he was in the middle of a tour or presentation. He sounded distracted when he said hello. I whispered that someone was in the house. He asked me to speak up. He couldn't hear me. I said it again, louder. Someone is in the house. They're in Sarah's room. The background noise disappeared. I heard him say something to my mom and sister, his voice urgent. Then he came back on the line and asked me what I meant. I explained about the tape and the sounds and the locked door. He told me to get out of the house immediately. Don't worry about grabbing anything. Just go to the neighbor's house and call the police. He said they were leaving right now and would be home as soon as possible, but it would take 3 hours. I hung up and ran to the front door. I had my hand on the doorknob when I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy footsteps moving across the hallway. Then I heard my sister's door open. I froze. The footsteps started coming down the stairs. Slow, measured steps, one at a time. I could see the stairs from where I was standing by the front door. Any second now, whoever was up there would come into view. I unlocked the front door as quietly as I could and pulled it open. The hinges creaked loudly. The footsteps on the stairs stopped. I ran. I didn't look back. I ran across our front yard and across the neighbor's yard to the Hendersons' house 2 doors down. I pounded on their door, screaming for help. Mrs. Henderson opened the door, looking alarmed. I was crying and could barely get the words out. But I managed to tell her that someone was in my house. She pulled me inside and locked the door behind us. Mr. Henderson was already on the phone with 911. The police arrived within 5 minutes. I watched from the Hendersons' window as 3 patrol cars pulled up in front of my house. Officers got out and approached with their hands on their weapons. They went inside. I watched and waited, my heart pounding. Minutes passed. Finally, one of the officers came out and walked over to the Hendersons' house. He told us they'd searched the entire house and found no one. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry. He asked me to come over and see if anything was missing or out of place. I walked back to my house with Mrs. Henderson holding my hand. The police had me walk through each room. Everything looked normal. Nothing was taken. Nothing was moved. Then we got to my sister's room. The door was open now. The police had used some kind of tool to pop the lock. I stepped inside and looked around. Everything was exactly as my sister always kept it. Bed made perfectly. Desk organized. Closet closed. But there was something on her bed that shouldn't have been there. It was a framed photo of our family. The photo usually sat on the hallway table downstairs. Now it was lying face up on my sister's bed, positioned carefully in the center of the mattress. The officer asked if I'd moved it there. I shook my head. The only explanation I could think of was that whoever had been in the house had taken it from downstairs and brought it up here. But that didn't make sense. The police said they'd searched everywhere. The closets, under the beds, the basement, the attic. There was nowhere else to hide. So where had the person gone? One of the officers noticed the window in my sister's room. It was closed and locked from the inside. But when he examined it more closely, he found fresh scratches on the frame. Like someone had used a tool to pry it open from the outside, climbed in, then closed and locked it behind them. But my sister's room was on the second floor. There was no ladder, no way to reach that window from the ground, without equipment. The officer went outside to investigate. He found disturbed dirt beneath the window and marks on the siding. Someone had used a ladder. They'd climbed up, broken into my sister's room, and then when they heard me running downstairs and opening the front door, they'd escaped the same way they came in. Out the window, down the ladder, and gone. My parents got home around 7 that evening. They'd driven straight through, not stopping except for gas. My mom hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. My dad talked to the police for a long time, his face getting redder and his voice getting louder as they explained what happened. My sister was shaken. She kept saying she felt violated, that someone had been in her private space, touching her things. She couldn't sleep in her room for weeks after that. The police never found out who broke in. They said it was likely someone who'd been watching the house, who knew when my family would be gone. The placement of the family photo suggested something personal, like they were sending a message. That thought terrified me more than anything else. Someone had watched us. Someone knew our routines. Someone had deliberately waited until I was alone. And they were never caught. Story 4. The phone calls. I was 13 when my parents went out of town for the weekend, leaving me home alone for the first time. They'd gone to visit my grandmother, who lived about 4 hours away in a nursing home. She'd been sick for a while, and my parents wanted to spend some quality time with her before things got worse. I begged them to let me stay behind because I had plans with friends that weekend, and didn't want to spend 2 days sitting in a nursing home that smelled like disinfectant and cafeteria food. After a lot of convincing and promises that I'd be responsible, they agreed, but only after giving me a long list of rules and emergency contacts. My mom wrote everything down on a piece of paper and stuck it to the refrigerator with a magnet. Numbers for the neighbors, the police, the fire department, poison control, and about 5 different relatives who lived within driving distance. She showed me where the first aid kit was, where the flashlights were in case the power went out, and where the fire extinguisher was kept under the kitchen sink. My dad was more relaxed about it. He told me to use common sense, don't do anything stupid, and call if anything felt wrong. He gave me a credit card to order food and told me not to spend more than $50 for the whole weekend. He also made me promise not to have anyone over, which I agreed to, even though I'd already been planning to have a couple friends come by on Saturday. They left Friday afternoon around 3. I stood in the driveway and waved as they pulled away, my mom's face pressed against the passenger window looking worried. My dad honked the horn twice as they turned the corner, and then they were gone. The house felt different immediately, bigger somehow, quieter. I went inside and locked the door behind me, feeling that rush of independence and slight nervousness that comes with being truly alone for the first time. The first night went fine. I ordered pizza, watched movies on the couch until way past midnight, and stayed up playing video games until my eyes hurt. I felt grown up and independent. I even cleaned up after myself, putting my dishes in the dishwasher and taking out the trash like my parents would have wanted. Saturday morning, I slept in until almost noon. I made myself breakfast, or really lunch at that point, and spent the afternoon texting with friends and playing more video games. Everything was perfect. I was starting to think I could handle being alone all the time. Around 6 that evening, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when the house phone rang. We still had a landline back then because my parents were old-fashioned about that kind of thing. I picked it up, expecting it to be my mom checking in. Instead, I heard a man's voice I didn't recognize. He asked if my parents were home. I told him they weren't and asked if I could take a message. There was a pause, and then he asked when they'd be back. Something about the question made me uncomfortable. It wasn't what he asked, but how he asked it. There was an edge to his voice, like he was testing me. I told him I wasn't sure and that he should try calling back another time. He didn't respond right away. There was just silence on the other end. And then he hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there holding the phone for a second, feeling uneasy. I told myself it was probably just a salesman or someone doing a survey. I went back to making my sandwich and tried to forget about it. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same number on the caller ID. I almost didn't answer, but I thought maybe it was important. I picked up. It was the same voice. This time he didn't ask about my parents. He asked if I was home alone. My stomach dropped. I lied and said my older brother was upstairs. He laughed. It was a cold, humorless laugh. He said he didn't believe me. Then he hung up again. My hands were shaking as I put the phone down. I went to the front door and checked that it was locked. It was. I went through the house checking all the windows. Everything was secure. I tried calling my parents, but neither of them answered. They were probably with my grandmother and had their phones turned off. I left a voicemail for my mom explaining what was happening and asking her to call me back as soon as possible. I went upstairs to my room and tried to distract myself with a movie on my laptop. I kept the sound low so I could hear if anything else happened. About 30 minutes passed, and I was starting to calm down. Then the phone rang again. I ran downstairs and checked the caller ID. Same number. I didn't want to answer, but I was afraid that if I didn't, whoever it was might escalate. I picked up the phone but didn't say anything at first. The man's voice was different this time. Angry. He told me he knew I was alone. He knew my parents were out of town. He said I should unlock the back door and make this easy. I hung up immediately and called 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I told her my name and address and explained that someone had been calling me, threatening me, saying they knew I was home, alone. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were being sent to my location right away. She asked me to describe what had happened in detail. As I was talking to her, I heard a noise from downstairs. It sounded like someone trying the back door handle. I whispered to the dispatcher that I thought someone was trying to get in. She told me to go to a room with a door that locked, preferably on the second floor, and to stay there until the police arrived. I ran to the bathroom in the hallway, locked the door, and sat down in the bathtub with the phone pressed to my ear. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking me questions to keep me calm. She asked about school, about my hobbies, about my friends. I answered in whispers, barely able to focus on what she was saying. I was listening for sounds downstairs. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. Someone had smashed one of the windows. The dispatcher heard it too. She told me to stay quiet and stay hidden. She said the police were less than a minute away. I could hear footsteps downstairs now, heavy boots on the hardwood floor. The person was inside the house. They were moving through the first floor, not trying to be quiet anymore. I heard furniture being moved, drawers being pulled open. The footsteps moved to the base of the staircase. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. I could hear each step as the person climbed the stairs. 1, 2, 3. Our staircase had 15 steps. 4, 5, 6. Then I heard sirens. Beautiful, wonderful sirens getting closer and closer. The footsteps on the stairs stopped. Then they started moving fast, running back down, thundering across the first floor. I heard the sound of the back door being wrenched open. More sirens, voices shouting. The dispatcher told me the officers were in the house and it was safe to come out, but I should wait for them to come get me. A minute later, there was a knock on the bathroom door. A female voice identified herself as Officer Rodriguez. I unlocked the door with trembling hands and saw a police officer standing there. She smiled at me and asked if I was okay. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure that was true. She took me downstairs and outside to a patrol car. There were 4 police cars in front of my house now, their lights washing everything in red and blue. Officer Rodriguez wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, even though it wasn't cold. She sat with me and explained what had happened. Someone had broken in through the kitchen window by smashing it with a rock. When the police arrived, the intruder had fled out the back door and escaped through the neighboring yards. They'd sent units to search the area. She asked me about the phone calls. I told her everything I could remember. She wrote it all down in a small notebook. Another officer came over and said they'd found a prepaid cell phone in the bushes near the back door. The intruder must have dropped it while fleeing. My parents arrived about 3 hours later. They'd gotten my voicemail and the call from the police and had driven straight through, barely stopping. My mom was crying before she even got out of the car. She ran to me and held me so tight I could barely breathe. My dad talked to the police for a long time. His face was red and his jaw was clenched. I could tell he was furious at himself for leaving me alone, even though none of this was his fault. The police traced the phone calls and found they'd all been made from that prepaid cell phone they'd found in the bushes. It had been purchased with cash at a convenience store 2 towns over, so there was no way to trace who bought it. The phone had only been used to call our house. Nothing else. They pulled fingerprints from the phone and from the broken window, but they didn't match anyone in the system. They searched the area for days, but never found the person who'd broken in. The creepiest part came a few days later when the police reviewed our home security footage. We had a camera pointed at the front of the house that my dad had installed a few months earlier. The footage showed a man standing across the street at various times over the past week, just watching our house. He was there Tuesday afternoon, Thursday evening, Friday morning before my parents left. He was always at a distance, but you could see him clearly enough to know he was watching. He wore different clothes each time, but it was definitely the same person based on his height and build. He'd been planning this, watching and waiting, learning our routines, figuring out when I'd be alone. The police enhanced the footage as much as they could, but the man always wore a baseball cap pulled low and kept his face turned away from the camera, like he knew it was there. They never identified him. My parents didn't leave me alone again after that. Not for years. They installed more cameras, better locks, a full security system with motion sensors and alarms. My dad even got a dog, a German shepherd named Max who barked at everything. But none of it made me feel completely safe again. For months, I jumped every time the phone rang. I checked and rechecked the locks on doors and windows multiple times each night. I had nightmares about footsteps on the stairs, about someone standing in the dark watching me. I'm 26 now, and I still think about that weekend sometimes. I wonder who that man was. I wonder why he targeted our house, targeted me. The police said there had been similar incidents in the area around that time, homes being watched, break-ins when people were alone. But they never connected them to a specific person. Whoever broke into my house that night is still out there. He was never caught. He was never identified. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my apartment, I think about those phone calls. I think about that voice asking if I was home alone, telling me to unlock the door. And I think about how close I came to opening that back door before I knew something was wrong. How different things might have been if I'd been just a little less cautious, a little more trusting. That's what scares me the most. Not what happened, but what could have happened. And the knowledge that somewhere out there, someone remembers that night the same way I do. Someone who got away.